So my name's Josh Myler. I'm the elementary school principal. We've been holding tours for the community to come in and see the state of the current building because many of you don't have an opportunity regularly to come in, or even if you do come in, you're here to see your kids and spend time with your kids, and so you may not look around the building and notice all the things that we notice on a daily basis. So we wanted to point out some of those things for you today. Also, we realize this isn't exactly the same as being here in person. If you have any questions and you'd like to reach out to me, you can reach me. My email is jmyler, M-Y-L-E-R, @psharvard.org, or you're welcome to call us at the school, 978-456-4145. We want to just make sure everyone has the best information possible so that they can make a good decision at town meeting. So let's point out a few things as we go through the building today. The first thing here in the library, this is one of the places where we see the first samples of many of our roof leaks. So if you look up here, we've got tiles that are marked. We replace tiles several times a year, at least once for all of them if they're marked, and then several times a year if we need to. You can see this one up here has a bucket under it because it's leaking pretty consistently. There are times where, because we're concerned about these computers, if we know it's going to be a particularly wet weekend, we'll throw a tarp over these computers to make sure that they don't get damaged. And part of the challenge here is that there's a flat roof over this part of the library, and then this part is under the two-story building. But even so, we see roof leaks throughout this building, not just in the part with the flat roof. And so it's an ongoing problem for us. It's not due to a lack of effort and maintenance. We regularly go up on the roof and try and find any of the leaks and repair them as we can. And sometimes we do better, and sometimes they seem to continue to pop up for us. Either new leaks just because the rubber is getting old and deteriorating, or the same leaks that are opening up again through freeze-thaw cycles and things like that. So it feels sometimes like we're playing a game of whack-a-mole where we get a couple leaks, things get better for a little while, and then it continues to cause problems. It's not just that all of the leaks are in the 55 wing, they're spread throughout the 88 wing as well, and we'll see some of that as we walk around. All right, a couple things to point out here. The first is, here's the first of our ceiling grates. At some point, the ceiling tiles get so deteriorated that they fall down and sometimes can fall pieces onto students. And so in places where the leaks are particularly bad, we sometimes replace them with these grates because we can't keep up with replacing tiles fast enough. That just lets the water drain straight through, but at least it doesn't create a risk with the tiles falling. You can see also in a lot of places we have this leaking where there's some of the roofing tar material coming down through the ceiling. We clean that off the walls regularly, but in a good rainstorm we get increasing kind of marking along the walls. You can see it along the stingray here of those leaks coming down. The other thing here is we're on the ramp. This connects the height of the K-wing all the way down to the height of the gymnasium, with the cafeteria at an intermediate height in between. This ramp isn't ADA compliant, and so it would need to be redesigned, and that's particularly challenging when we're connecting pieces of different heights to get it all connected in a way that's ADA compliant within the space constraints that we have, because it has to do with the slopes of the ramps and the number of landings. So one of the issues we faced is trying to figure out how to encourage community use while also making sure we maintain the security of the building. Right now the building is either open to everyone or it's closed. There's no way to cordon off portions of the building so that it can be used for community events and things without leaving all of the classroom wings also open. There are these doors throughout the building, but these are fire doors. They close in a fire event to prevent the spread of fire, but they don't limit, or closing them and locking them would limit the egress options, and so we can't close them and lock them to prevent movement throughout the school. The other thing to notice here is that the walls, all of the interior walls, are not tied back to the structural steel, which doesn't meet the current seismic codes. We don't think of that a lot in Massachusetts because we don't consider ourselves a high seismic risk. There are regular small earthquakes here. Again, I'm not saying that we need to be super concerned about an earthquake, but it doesn't meet the current code, and so when we hit that threshold of doing the renovations, it's another thing that we have to address in order to bring the building up to code. So this is our boiler room. We're in the kindergarten wing, which means that this boiler room would go away. The boilers are reasonably new. The challenge is the heating system that they're connected to is aging, and I'll show you that when we go into a classroom. The other issue is much of the heating system is controlled by a forced air thermostat system, and that system over time has become, there it is, I'll finish this later. So as you heard when I was in the boiler room, the air compressor is really loud that runs the thermostats, and because that system is pretty leaky, they don't work very well to control the heat in the rooms. So most of those don't actually control the heat. It's a hot water system where the hot water circulates through a loop continuously. So the only control we have in any given classroom is to turn on or off a blower in this, what's called a univent heater. So this heater sits against the wall, there's hot water that circulates through the bottom of it, and then you can turn on a blower that blows air across that hot water to heat the rooms. One of the challenges with that is the only fresh air that the room gets is when this blower is on. So if your room gets too hot and you turn the blower off, there's no longer any air circulation in your room. And so the air can get pretty stagnant, which is especially a problem here in the kindergarten wing where the air quality is already not ideal. So the other issue with this is, if you look around in most of the classrooms, you'll see a pair of scissors next to the univent heaters. These weren't designed to work in this way. They were designed to be on thermostats, but the thermostats don't work. And so to turn them on, you have to reach down with the scissors, find the little hole in here, and push sideways. There it goes. And then the blower turns on. Now, it works, but it's not really a great long-term system. A couple other things to say about these univent heaters. I'll turn this one off so we can hear a little better. There we go. A couple other things about the univent heaters. Because they have an air vent on the back to pull in outdoor air, when it's really cold, they often freeze. And when the water freezes in them, a couple things can happen. Because it's a big loop, it can block the circulation to the rest of the building, and so you get the whole building gets cold instead of just one room. The other thing that's an issue is when they freeze, as many of you know from your house, if a pipe freezes, the pipes can burst, and then you get leaking, and you get the antifreeze from the system, which didn't successfully stop it from freezing, also now spilling out into the classrooms. So when these freeze, the remedy to it is we get hot air blowers and like hair dryers, and we go around the building trying to find the frozen one and get it thawed to get the water circulating back through the building. There have been days when me, the assistant principal, the superintendent of schools, the buildings facilities guy, and we borrowed a couple other people as well, have been walking around the building with blow dryers trying to get the heat back on so we could continue to hold school. The other issue with the heating system is it's really inconsistent through the school. So there are days, our record for December was that there were days with classrooms in the 50s and simultaneously a classroom that hit 94 degrees. That classroom doesn't even have any control. They don't have a switch on their univent heater. And so that wide range just makes it really hard for kids to focus. It makes it hard for kids to pay attention to their teacher. It makes it hard to be comfortable. And it ties into that question of air and air circulation for the building. Now, this might be a good time to mention that any one of these issues is not what encouraged the school building committee to decide to recommend a new building. As we walk through, there are lots of different issues, any one of which probably could have been addressed. Some are harder than others, some involve more disruption to students than others, but it was the compilation of all of these things together that brought the price and the disruption of renovation up so high that that's when the school building committee started to look and say, well, given that there are more unknowns in a renovation scenario, and given that the long-term durability of the building is almost certainly lower in a renovation scenario, they started to say, maybe a new building actually does make sense, and started to explore that. I went into the process expecting to renovate this building. I think many of the people in the process went in expecting that, and it wasn't until we really dug into the details of this building, saw the code issues, the heating system issues, the roofing issues, and all of the things together that we started to say maybe this isn't the best choice for the long-term prospects of the town. So another issue that we've seen come up increasingly is that many of the systems in the building are just wearing out. It's about at the age of its life where that starts to happen. One of the big ones is that a lot of the seals in the windows are failing, so these have lost a lot of their insulative quality and they're obviously not visually appealing anymore. So we've replaced some of those. We've stopped replacing them now pending the vote because we don't want to pour more money into those types of problems if we don't need to. But we're seeing an increasing rate of failing of those types of seals. The other thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about heaters is the same thing is happening with the blower motors in the heaters. We've replaced about 5 of those so far this year. We just had another one fail a couple of days ago. That room is without heat. Luckily it's starting to warm up a little bit, but just last week it was pretty cold. And so that room's without heat until we can get a replacement motor in for that. And the rate that those motors are starting to fail is increasing. One of the issues we face in the kindergarten wing is that because of the Board of Health requirement, we're not allowed to open up any of these walls. They've been sealed off so that any mold issues don't spread through the building or spread into the air, and we do regular air quality tests several a year to verify that. And so far those air quality tests have all come back within normal ranges. There are 2 issues there. One is it makes regular ongoing maintenance really difficult. So for example, this is one of the sinks in the kindergarten wing. We would love to update this sink, but because of the requirements we can't open up the wall to do that. We had one sink that started to have problems and had to take it out. Taking out just that one sink, which would normally be a relatively small project, required them to come in and seal off the area, put on the full hazmat suits and remove the sink, which cost about $8,000 to remove just that one sink. It shouldn't, under normal circumstances, wouldn't cost anywhere near that much. It also brings up the issue that many of our classrooms don't currently have sinks, which based on the current recommendations of the MSBA, they recommend that all classrooms have sinks so that students can wash their hands more regularly. It helps with allergy issues. It helps with also the breadth of activities that teachers can do in their classroom by having access to that. So there are lots of issues here in the kindergarten wing that make maintenance really difficult because we can't open up the walls. So far we're making it work. The challenge is at any given moment we could get back an air quality test that's too high, or a system could fail here in this wing that would mean that we would have to start opening up walls. And if that happens, we then have to take all of the students out of this part of the building. As I mentioned before, we often refer to it as the K-wing, and we do have 4 kindergarten classrooms down here, but it also houses pre-K, several special education rooms, our health and Spanish room, a tutoring room, and I think there's one more, oh, the boiler room. So all of that means that it's not just 4 kindergarten classes, it's trying to find space for all of those groups within the 88 building, which is going to be a very, very tight fit. It may be doable for a short term, but certainly not a sustainable solution, which then could bring back into question whether we need to get modulars on site until a remedy is found, and modulars are fairly expensive. So one thing to point out in this room is it's not just the amount of space that we're struggling with, but also how that space is configured. So for example, this room is the size of a classroom, but what we needed was not another classroom, but space for teachers to work with small groups of students. So we really struggle to find the right spaces for that. In this room, we've divided it up as best we can and have as many as 5 groups working in here simultaneously. So we have some English language learner students, some students who are struggling with reading, possibly another reading group, and then our literacy specialist here. And all of these groups can sometimes be working at the same time. And of all of the kids who you really want to have a calm, focused environment, students who are trying to learn the language or who are struggling with reading problems are the groups who most need that quiet, focused space to be able to really pay attention with their teacher. And this space just isn't very conducive to that. It's the best we can do with what we currently have, and we've divided it up as best we have to kind of limit that disruption, but it's not well designed for it. At the same time, we have students sometimes working with tutors in the hallways, working within the classrooms, which sometimes can be difficult. Sometimes it's great because they can work with peers and feel more included, and there are times when that's appropriate, and other times a student really needs some quiet space to be able to focus with their teacher. So one of the things we've looked at is how we can design those spaces to feel inclusive for the students, to be near their classroom so they're not wasting a lot of time traveling, but also to provide the privacy and the focused space that they need to be able to be successful in their learning. So this leak is my least favorite one in the whole school. We have lots to choose from. The reason why I dislike this one so much is that's our best guess of what's causing some of the false fire alarms that we get. So we do regular fire drills with our students, but obviously anytime the fire alarm goes off, we need to evacuate the building. And when that's an unplanned evacuation due to just a false alarm in the fire alarm system, a couple things happen. One, it takes a lot longer to get students back into the building because the fire department needs to do a very thorough check of the building to make sure it's safe. The other thing is, if we can't find the cause of it, unlike at your house where you can like unplug a smoke alarm because you know it's something from that you were cooking in the kitchen, it's a school, we're not allowed to do that, to turn off sections of the smoke, the fire detection system. And so there have been times when we've had 2 or 3 evacuations in the same day that can get really disruptive for the students to have to evacuate the building multiple times, and with the added stress of it's not a planned fire alarm, and so it's additional stress on the town and on the teachers. So the gym is another area that there's been a lot of discussion about. There are several things to think about here. One is that this gym, because we don't have a high school and a middle school, this gym is often the de facto middle school gym. So we have middle school sports teams practicing here. Their ability to host games is limited because this isn't a middle school sized gym, it's too short. And the other issue is there's not a lot of space for other people for spectators. So the space towards the wall is very limited. We, a couple years ago, added the padding all the way around instead of just on the ends to help limit we'd had some injuries because the space is so narrow, of kids running into the walls while they were playing. And if you add spectators in here, the spectators very quickly become more participants in the game than spectators just because of the size of the space. The other thing we've looked at is, was there a way to renovate this gym and keep it functional? We looked at, could we bump out a little further out the back to make it longer? We looked at ways to add seating. If you see the yellow vertical stripe, that's the structural steel. And so we looked at, could we bump out in between those, but you would still have to have the structural steel there, which doesn't solve really the width or the safety issue, or it's just not ideal. And so when we looked at this space, we said, again, it's another example of, if it were just the size of the gym, that's not a reason to build a new building. It, in conjunction with everything else, became part of the conversation of, is that the wisest choice for the town? So there's been lots of conversation about the size of the cafeteria and whether we need a larger cafeteria or not. There are several things that play into that conversation for us. The first is that the kitchen, the size of the kitchen is about half of the recommended size for serving this size population of students. Our staff does a wonderful job. They prepare a lot of the food here. They source a lot of it locally. So unlike some districts where it's just kind of opening pre-prepared meals and warming them up, they do a lot of food prep here, which is fabulous and creates a better environment for our students and better options for the food service. But they're very cramped doing it in that kitchen, which means that they spill over into the cafeteria for things like the paying line, the salad bar, a lot of those things, which cuts into the space where we can seat students. You end up with the register set up here and some food service set up behind us here so that there's less space to seat students, and it limits their ability to provide the type of food that they would like for our students. The other issue in the cafeteria we face is around the stage. The stage is not big enough for a lot of the things that we try to do on it, so there are times when it gets built out and comes out about to right here, which then cuts into the space for seating students yet again. And all of that together means that we have to feed each grade separately, so we end up serving lunch at 6 different times, the earliest starting at about 10:50 and the latest ending at about 1:30. Now, students often have a snack on kind of whichever the long half of their day is, so if they have a really late lunch, they'll have a morning snack or vice versa. I think snacks throughout the day can be really helpful for some students. That's not a terrible thing, but it means that several things, that range is really wide for some students, and it's hard for them to go that long, especially for young kids. The other thing it means is that most of the day the cafeteria is taken up with preparing for lunch, serving lunch, or cleaning up from lunch. We can't do much else in the cafeteria because it's busy most of the day. So all of that together, the combination of the space that we lose for serving, the space that we lose for the stage, and all of those other pieces just mean that this cafeteria is undersized based on the state recommendations and makes the scheduling and use of the space a lot less ideal. So one of the issues that we face as we try to find the right types of spaces for those small groups to meet in is that the design of the building has several of these spaces where you have to walk through one room to get to the other rooms. So here we have 2 special education rooms in the back, But to get to those, the students have to walk through this space, interrupting the group that's here and trying to learn here. And so it creates a lot of disruption, again, for the students who most need an uninterrupted, focused time for their learning. So this is another space that we found for some of our small group work. The challenge is this was originally designed as a closet, so we've done the best we could to make it look like a small group space, but it doesn't have any temperature control. It has air handlers up above it that can be very loud when they're trying to work. This is actually a speech room, so a room where you really want kids to be able to hear what their teacher is saying and hear themselves to see if they're making the right improvements in their speech. And it also has no exterior windows. And so it's an interior space with no light to outside or no light to the hallway either. And it's functional, it's not ideal, it doesn't support student learning as well as we would like. One of the issues that came up as we started exploring a renovation option is that it would trigger the need to do code upgrades, including fire sprinklers throughout the building. In order to do that, we would have to remove the interior ceilings. They're drop ceilings, they would likely need to be dropped even lower to put in the piping for the fire sprinklers and the ventilation and ductwork for the new heating system, which means that in a lot of these rooms the ceilings would get even lower and make that the ceiling heights can make the spaces feel less comfortable. It also means that that's a very disruptive process for students. You can't have students in those parts of the building as that work is going on, which means that as we're working through the building to make those repairs, students may have to be dislocated many times throughout the process, and it increases the need for modular classrooms to have a space for all of those students to be while that work is going on. It's not a simple thing that can just be done over the summer. It would involve work throughout the school year and be very disruptive to our current students. We've talked a little bit about some ADA compliance issues. Some of those things could be remedied with things like powered doors, because students or faculty with ADA issues need to be able to access all of the rooms. Some of those aren't as easily remedied. For example, these bathrooms, there's no way to get enough space in this bathroom to have the turning radiuses and space required for someone with limited mobility. The thresholds are relatively easy to fix, that's doable, but things like the size of the room and the way that the doors swing and accessibility in that way are much harder to fix. So one of the issues we faced is trying to figure out how to encourage community use while also making sure we maintain the security of the building. Right now the building is either open to everyone or it's closed. There's no way to cordon off portions of the building so that it can be used for community events and things without leaving all of the classroom wings also open. There are these doors throughout the building, but these are fire doors. They close in a fire event to prevent the spread of fire, but they don't limit, or closing them and locking them would limit the egress options. And so we can't close them and lock them to prevent movement throughout the school. The other thing to notice here is that the walls, all of the interior walls, are not tied back to the structural steel, which doesn't meet the current seismic codes. We don't think of that a lot in Massachusetts because we don't consider ourselves a high seismic risk. There are regular small earthquakes here. Again, I'm not saying that we need to be super concerned about an earthquake, but it doesn't meet the current code. And so when we hit that threshold of doing the renovations, it's another thing that we have to address in order to bring the building up to code. So we're in the 88 wing, we're upstairs in one of the 5th grade classrooms. We had persistent leaking through this wall. This is right over the part of the library, and there's a flat roof outside of here. That something about this roof isn't working well right now, because when it's rainy, it regularly fills up that roof like a swimming pool, and then starts to flow back into this room. And what we found after a while is that this baseboard came detached, and behind it there was some mold growing. We think it was localized here. We've remedied it and cleaned it up. We left it open because we wanted to see if we could get a better idea of where the leaking was and what the issues were. But again, the leaking and the issues aren't just in the 55 wing, they're throughout the building. And one of the things to look at here is the design of the ceiling as well. The way that the ceiling is designed, the structural steel is here, and then you can see the panels. So there's a panel, it's called a Tectum panel, that has the inside surface, some insulation, the outside sheathing, and then the shingles on top of that. There's no place that we could add insulation to make this better. And part of it is that the structural steel, as it comes down here, it ties into a big piece of structural steel right behind this wall, and that's uninsulated essentially. So what you get is the water flowing, melting at the edge because there's that hot piece of structural steel right there that's not insulated. So you get melting right here at the edge and then refreezing just past it, and that's what's creating a lot of the ice dam problems. It's a combination of the way the structural steel was installed and not insulated, the slope of the roof that's right on the low end of what's appropriate for a shingled roof, and just kind of the design of all of that has led to regular and persistent ice dams. Now, with when we were talking about renovations, we said we could replace the roofing, like the actual shingles, and that might make it better, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of the design of the roof and the insulation of the walls. To fix the insulation of the walls, we would have had to pull out all of the insides of the exterior walls and re-insulate and make the walls thicker, which isn't easy to do and isn't terribly cost effective. And there's no easy way to redesign the shape of the roof to solve that problem, because the ceiling of this classroom is the structural steel of the whole roof structure. There's no attic space to redesign into. So the combination of those things, as we look at designing and making sure that this project solves the long-term problem and not just a short-term remedy, the school building committee didn't feel comfortable that even with replacing the roofing material, that it would solve the long-term problem and be a good sustainable solution down the road without just pushing the problem into the next 5 or 10 or 15 years.